So Jeshua turned the Essenes down. Hey guys, it's John here on the back deck with a magnificent mug of coffee. Thoroughly enjoying this beautiful day. It's supposed to go to the 80s today. And loving being out here in the weather on the deck. I wanted to hop on because I get a lot of comments and questions about the Essenes, and it just happened to get in a live stream again last night. And then this morning I had someone who got vehement with me that Jeshua was an Essene and this big argument. I want to talk a little bit about the history of how the Essenes kind of came into this picture. Back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, starting with Madame Blavatsky and then going into eventually Edgar Cayce, and there was this big spiritual movement that was forefronted by the Theosophical Society. One of the big things about the Essenes became a major league topic. According to a guy named Edmond Bordeaux-Jacquelli, he in the 1920s discovered the Essene Gospel of Peace in the Vatican Library. Now, you need to know that the Vatican completely denies this, that they've never been able to find that book again, and the only actual references to that book come from Jacquelli's own book. At the same time this was going on, there was another book out there, the Gospel of the Holy 12, that was supposedly found. Once again, never actually found, cannot be documented, the original text. This was another author. The convenient similarities between these two texts was they both had a vegetarian agenda. They both were trying to prove that Jesus was a vegetarian. And so these books were very much vegetarian leaning, trying to create this vegetarian lifestyle. Even though the Bible tells you the list of animals you can and can't eat, and Jeshua eats fish and lamb in the Bible, so that they still say that he was a vegetarian and that was the moral right to be vegetarian. Edgar Cayce came up through the Theosophical Society. The Essenes were a very big topic in that early building of the Theosophical Society. They were said to be this sect that Jesus comes from and all this, and they started saying that John the Baptist was his cousin, and that his sister, and they started creating this structure around Jeshua's life that supposedly was this backstory for Jeshua, which is not documented anywhere, including in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Jeshua is never mentioned in the Dead Sea Scrolls. He's not listed in the Dead Sea Scrolls. He's not talked about in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Dead Sea Scrolls are not about him. The Dead Sea Scrolls are basic writings of older books and talking about the coming Messiah. Now, the Theosophical Society, as it grew into prominence, they kept trying to bring about a Messiah. And later on, they brought about Jiddu Krishnamurti, and they tried to get him to declare himself the new Messiah and take control of the Theosophical Society and lead it. And they created an event for him to come up, and he literally came up on the event and said, no, not only will I not become a Messiah for you, but I'm leaving the organization. And he left. Now, I found that out this past year. I didn't know much about Jiddu Krishnamurti, and I'm just now reading up on his stuff. But one of my past life regression memories is that this group, and I assume it was the Essenes, it could have been any other Judaic sect at all, were trying to convince Jeshua, who had become very popular, to not only become the Messiah, but specifically to become the king of Israel, the king of the Jews, right? To raise an army, fight Rome, and have this violent overthrow of these oppressors and create this new Jewish state underneath the rule of a Messiah. And one of my regression memories is literally him turning that down. Him saying, "No, I'm about love. I'm about peace. I'm about joy." He wasn't into armed conflict. He wasn't into war. Leave to Caesar that which is Caesar's. These concepts of Jeshua talked about had nothing to do with number one, violent overthrow of anything, but number two, everything he talks about is you stepping into your power, your divinity. The greater works than I have done, you will do. It is your faith that heals you. It goes completely against everything the Dead Sea Scrolls says about a Messiah. He didn't believe that he was a Messiah. He also didn't believe that there was a Messiah. He thought that that was a Judaic myth. And so what he was teaching was, look what I found. Take heart. I have overcome the world. Does not mean take heart. You have to follow me and put me as your Messiah. This eventually led to the idea that they were really pushing him to be this Messiah king and him turning them down. They started just putting it out. The group started saying, he's the Messiah, he's the Messiah, he's the Messiah. And then he gets crucified. And what do they put over his head? King of the Jews. But they put King of the Jews over his head because everyone's saying he's our leader, he's the one, he's the but it wasn't what he was teaching. His mission, his teaching was sort of hijacked by Judaic sects trying to force him into becoming a Messiah or a king. Now, is this backed up historically? Yes, it is. The first armed conflict against Rome was John the Essene, led a group of Essenes against Rome. And the armed conflict and the war and all that was coming from the Essene sect. So Jeshua, in my memory, turning them down would make logical sense because he was not about armed conflict and he was not about messiahs. So when I look at that, so then what happens next? In the Theosophical Society, next Edgar Casey gets really big. Now, at the time period, they were talking about the Essenes because they were finding evidence that this Essene group survived and lived and all this stuff. And I've been lucky enough to stand at the site of Qumran, see the cave where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found. It's an amazing site. But what's interesting and what's most prevalent about that site is all of the ritual bath chambers, because they were a baptismal Judaic sect. They believed in the sacred cleansing of the body, and they believed in baptisms. And there is no place in the Bible that Jeshua ever does a baptism. And I have no memory of ever doing baptisms. That is a Judaic doctrine, dogma, ceremony that was not at all what he was teaching. So you walk around Qumran and you see all these ritual bath chambers because that's what was the part of their Judaic belief, was these ritual bath chambers. But the Theosophical Society grabs a hold of it. Now, Theosophical Society has a lot of different things going on. One of the big seers of the time that they were very much into was Edgar Casey. Edgar Casey was coming from this Christian background. He was very much into the ideas of the Theosophical Society and what they were teaching. And he started talking about the Essenes and started creating stories out of his belief. I completely believe he was coming from it honestly, but I think he was coming from his own personal belief system. And he was creating things into the story. Time goes by. Edgar Casey becomes almost deified himself. Everyone starts to think that Edgar Casey is infallible, and they start creating these stories around Edgar Casey's work. And Edgar Casey's work is very much steeped in not only his Christianity, but the teachings of the Theosophical Society, Madame Blavatsky, and all of that. Then you get up into the 80s, and you start having people coming out like Dolores Cannon, who very much was a student of all that. And I don't say she was a member of the Theosophical Society. I don't know that to be true, but her structure was coming up through that belief system. And so Dolores was from all accounts of her, was a very well-meaning person. But there are some things you need to know about Dolores. Dolores never went to college. She was not a certified hypnotherapist. She finished high school, and then she took a online mail-in course on hypnosis. Now, there's a difference between hypnotherapy and hypnosis. Hypnotherapy is about going in and uncovering and experiencing various aspects of trauma or issues in life to help people, break free of belief systems. Hypnosis is a stagecraft geared towards suggestibility. And so the idea of using something that's geared towards putting suggestions into the head rather than extracting information out, it kind of makes the method of regression questionable. I know people who were personally regressed by Dolores Cannon herself, and two of those people were very upset after the regression because they really felt like she was trying to prove theories during her sessions. And one of them was very angry because he really felt, his exact words were, "I think she was looking for material for her next book." Um, I I had a connection, talked to her one time. She refused to regress me because I was like, "Wow, this is Dolores Cannon. I can go get regressed by her." She would not regress anybody who had been regressed by anybody else, and she did not invite peer review of any of her work. If she had had peer review of her work, modern hypnotherapists would have denounced her work because it didn't match any of the criteria of modern hypnotherapy. Um, and so she, if I take just what I know from friends of mine who had that experience, from my personal experience, and from the Theosophical Society and the teachings, all of these books about the Essenes and all the things that she came out with were coming from her own belief and were being actually interjected into other regressions, probably unknowingly, probably without knowing. There was probably no ill intent for doing it. It was just that she wasn't actually qualified to do what she was doing. And so now all these books are written about the Essenes, and everyone comes to me and they say, "Oh, you were an Essene, you were this, you were that," and they have all these stories about the Essenes. None of them are documented. None of them are documented. They all start in the 1920s and forward through the Theosophical Society. There's no history of any of that prior. There's no mention of it prior. There's no mention of Jeshua being involved with these scenes prior. This is all 1920s and forward Theosophical Society teachings that the root origin of was to try to promote Hindu teachings of vegetarianism and various other things. So all of these books and texts that you see coming along, if people were putting faith in the origins of these things, well, it's like the book that I've talked about in a different video, The Bloodline of Jeshua. We know full well that book was a forgery. I mean, the original texts were a forgery because the police caught the guy forging them, creating the documents. So during that period, there was a whole bunch of people who were pushing Theosophical Society ideas of Hinduism, which is why they brought in Krishnamurti, right? They were trying to westernize this ideology. And when you look at the texts themselves, none of them have any background. There's no place in history where you can find the original source text that they claim to have found. It's all a fabrication to meet a chosen belief. And when you look at the stories of Jeshua and the Essenes, I have that one memory. It's only one memory of him turning a group down, and I assumed it was the Essenes, probably because of my own reading on the subject. He turned them down for being their Messiah and their king. And so when I look at the history of Jeshua and the Essenes, I can only judge it from my own personal experience. And I only have that one memory of that, right? I don't have any other memories of him with them ever. I have no memories of us hanging out with them ever. Um, I have no memories of us going back and having sacred ritual baths or baptizing ourselves. I have none of those memories, and they never showed up in anything I've ever experienced in visual memory. So I tend to look at all of this concepts of Jeshua and the Essenes as a, a fabrication coming up out of the early Theosophical Society by people who were trying to prove Western and Eastern traditions as one. And I really think that it's a struggle that we're fighting against nowadays, because the world has this old age dogma, and then the Theosophical Society came in and started creating a new age dogma. So now you've got a new religion. They literally tried to create their own religion. That's why they tried to push Krishnamurti into becoming the Messiah. So was Jeshua an Essene? Who knows whether he hung out with him when he was younger? John didn't know him when he was younger. But when John met him, he and walked with him, they were not in a group like that. They were not claiming that he was the Messiah. They were not claiming that he was the king of the Jews. They were not claiming those things. He was kind of pushed into that forefront because he had become so popular that the groups were claiming he was. And so it turned out that ended up being one of his biggest downfalls, was that other groups were saying he was something he was saying he was not. And so that's my whole thought on this Jeshua and the Essenes thing. And I hope that makes sense to you guys. You have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. See ya. Bye.